Hey everyone, welcome to another Marvel Monday where Becca and I will take a deep dive into this recent episode of WandaVision, which, I mean, we haven't stopped talking about it since it aired. So we're probably going to have a lot to say about this one, I would guess.
Oh yes, yeah, I have been thinking about it nonstop. Probably my favorite one so far.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. I mean, the big reveal at the end has had everybody buzzing for the last like 4 days. So yeah, definitely a lot that we're going to get into there. But before we do that, we have to talk about this week's Marvel must-haves, the new WandaVision related merchandise that was released this week. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump back to last week because they did eventually put stuff up. So we had that sword sweatshirt last week, and then a couple days later, they had a whole bunch of other sword items. So some stuff that you can get on Zazzle if you just want to add to your collection. Yeah, magnets and then a lot of stuff with Monica Rambeau. So
Yeah, I actually haven't seen that Monica stuff with the sword logo too. That's pretty cool. I like that.
I think if I click this, it'll take me to yeah, it's gonna take me to the page, so I'll let that load for a moment. But yeah, and there you have kids shirts and adult shirts as well. So you can if you really like this character, and I do, um, there's plenty of stuff for you as well. And then I'm gonna jump down to the very end.
I
Yeah,
think a
there's
lot
so
of
much.
people like this character these days, so you're not
Mhm.
alone there.
Yeah, you can even get a sword phone case and a matching pop socket. And then they on Shop Disney, they have this Vision shirt, which yeah, I'll go to that really quick. And then a WandaVision shirt as well. So again, these were released last week. Let me see if I can pull up that Monica. There we go. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It has like somewhat of a comic book look to it.
Yeah. And then of course, as you were saying last week with the sweatshirt matches her outfit or her style. So yeah, there we go with that. And then the Vision shirt that they have on Shop Disney with the nice big uh, diamond there, yellow diamond.
Yeah, I love shirts like that that aren't so obvious that don't just straight up say
Right.
WandaVision. Although this one that we're looking at right now too, I also love that one because of the very simple look. But
Yes.
that Vision shirt is just anybody could see that and have no idea what it is, and I love that.
Right. And then people who do know, they'll say, "Hey,"
Right.
you're like, "Yes." Oh, and I sorry. For this week, we didn't get a lot of exciting releases. These are a Hot Topic and then a Box Lunch exclusive. If you were watching, let's see, I think I pulled them up on a separate tab. So there's like a girls cut shirt, a juniors cut, and then oh, there we go. And then there's also just or did I got both of them? Are the adult? Okay. But yes, so there's like an adult style and then a junior style, and it's just that picture of Agnes. And then I do like this. Uh, I'll come to that in just a minute. I
Yeah,
do
of
like,
the two, I'm with you there. I prefer that one.
and then of course they have more sword, which we've seen. We've seen this logo. It's on Zazzle, so you can kind of do whatever with it. But yeah, it's a little different sizes. So if you want a really big logo versus a smaller one, and then there's one that's like on the pocket. So
Now we saw a lot of sword merchandise that was very similar, if not the same, as this right here. With like, I think it was after the first two episodes were released.
mhm.
Yeah,
Right, yeah, they had yeah, I think some tank tops and maybe a few T-shirts, so they're like,
adding to
"Oh."
the collection, I guess.
Yes, yes. And then, yeah, here's this again, and I like the, Wanda at the top, and then there's Vision at
Yeah.
the bottom there, so yeah, but it's that 60s style look, so anyway, that will pretty much do it for, Marvel must-haves.
Cool. Yeah, some interesting stuff there, and I'm looking forward to. I mean, given some of the stuff or characters and everything that's been going on with this week's episode, I'm looking forward to what we might get going forward.
Yes.
But speaking of this week's episode, let's go ahead and dive into it. So you mentioned this being one of your favorite, maybe your favorite episode, I guess. Any particular thoughts, just like as an overview before we get into it?
Well, this just for the episode on the whole, this is exactly what I was expecting last week, and what I think we're gonna get going forward, where we're in the sitcom world for a decent part of the episode, but then we also get to spend time with the characters trying to solve the mystery outside of the hex. So it was just the perfect balance for me of
Yeah.
you know this almost fun, little bit creepy sitcom world, and uh, you know
Yeah,
unraveling the thread, and we're putting together the puzzle.
I think balance is the perfect word to describe it. I think that it was, we mentioned even last week too that how much we were enjoying the sitcom world, but it was kind of refreshing to get back out of it and get more context and everything. And now that we are bouncing back and forth between the two, I feel like we've really hit our groove here with this show. So before we actually get into what happens in the new stuff in this episode, you actually pointed out something interesting to me, that they changed a line, one of Wanda's lines in the recap from previous episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went back and watched just to make sure, but in what we've seen in the sitcom, and then in both the third and fourth episode, after she sends Monica out, she says oh, she's not here, honey, or she had to leave, honey, she had to rush home.
Yeah.
And then in the recap, she goes, oh, she's gone, she didn't belong here. Very interesting that they would change it in the recap and play it differently.
Yeah, and I would guess that's probably just an editing thing. It wasn't really meaning anything, but pretty cool that we're dealing with this show that is like breaking the rules of TV, and they're just changing things outside of the actual show. So I like that they're doing little things like that. Also, got to point this one out here. Yeah, can't believe we missed that Thanos reference there. We should have jumped on that.
Yeah.
So as we get into this new episode, we open up with Wanda and Vision trying to get the crying twins to go to sleep. And eventually Agnes shows up right as Wanda says they need some help. So conveniently timed, and Vision notices that right away. But we get one of those weird sort of fourth wall breaking scenes pretty early as Agnes tries to retake a scene, literally looks at Wanda and says, do you want to just take that from the top? And so that was a very interesting way to show us, first of all, give us another weird moment that, letting us know something's wrong. Obviously now we know that, have a good idea of what's going on here. But this was the first time that like Agnes was like a big part of that too. So clearly something is up with Agnes. There's something weird about this character, as we've been talking about from the beginning. I've been saying Agatha Harkness, that's the popular theory, but who knows? So many different options out there at this point. And as we said, Vision notices something is going wrong here, and he's really starting to question it. And that's sort of the main through line of this episode is Vision is catching on and not happy with what's going on, and we'll obviously get more into that as we move along here. But I have a question, and I want to know what is up with the tiger?
See, it's funny you say that, because I didn't even catch the tiger. It was after listening to a podcast where they're like, oh yeah, the tiger is front and center, that on my next rewatch, I was like, oh, it's so obviously there.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
wasn't.
and it's weird because in that opening scene too, Agnes specifically says, I think she's like making a joke, like, Ralph can't tame this tiger or something like that. And then we see the tiger like very prominently placed on the middle of the dining room table there, and it's in multiple scenes. I believe I saw somebody else talking about, I saw an image from the intro, which we'll get into in a little bit too, that there's a tiger like on like the arms of a chair that Vision is sitting in. So weird that a tiger keeps popping up. I have no Marvel knowledge to pull from here that would connect a tiger. I don't know the relevance of a tiger, but it seems too obvious to be just a prop in that spot.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I have no guesses as to what it would be, but I don't think they're doing anything accidentally. Like,
Right. So the big thing that happens in that opening scene is, and as you can kind of see in this image here, but get a better look here. The twins go from being babies to being 5 years old as they just age themselves up. I also want to point out too that they were impervious to Wanda's magic as she was trying to use
mhm.
it to put them to sleep. For some reason, didn't work. Your guess is as good as mine on that one too. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But we do see 5-year-old Billy and Tommy. And I thought this was really interesting because after last week's episode, I know a lot of Marvel Comics fans were excited to see Wiccan and Speed. And my thought was, well, I mean, they're children. They're babies now. We're not going to see them, in their full teenage superhero, in that way in this series. But obviously the rules are all thrown out the window at this point. So we could see them be full-on superheroes by next week. Who knows?
That's true. That's true.
We do have to talk about that intro, as I mentioned. The what shows were in their growing pains, and I know there were some Full House references as well.
Mhm.
I'm blanking on the other big 80s sitcom that was involved.
Yeah, me too. The whole
Yeah, the whole painting thing. I'm sure Kyle
right.
will jump in there at some point, but we have to talk about one of the most ridiculous images that we got. We saw a few baby pictures from Vision,
Mhm.
which was I know Kyle told me that you found this hysterical as it
I
came out.
did. I
I'm with
did.
you. I laughed as I saw it the first time, but since I used this image in my recap of the episode, the more I look at it, the more nightmarish it is. It's kind of terrifying.
No, you're right. You're right.
A little baby Vision with a little baby Mind Stone in there. Yeah, so it was a funny, interesting intro this week.
Well, it was just so unexpected. I was totally thinking we were gonna have little pictures of Paul Bettany as a kid, but I don't know why I thought that.
Yeah, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Well, it's funny because I mean, the whole joke obviously is Vision was never a baby like this. We get
That's
the
true.
line in Age of Ultron where he specifically points out, "I was born yesterday," and
Mhm.
so he's a full adult synthezoid, I guess, at that point. So Kyle did come through for us. Family
Thanks.
Ties, that was the other
Thank
one.
you.
So after the intro, we jump back out of the hex, which we will learn in a little bit, and we see Monica kind of undergoing some tests and having these flashbacks and like glimpses of what she saw in her experience within in the hex. But we saw this image as it was flashing through everything, and this didn't happen while she was in there. This isn't something that we saw. So I'm wondering, is this a glimpse of the future? Did this happen before everything in Westview? I'm not sure. You have any thoughts on that?
I didn't even catch that. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it
I
flashes by really quick. I had a hard time getting a screenshot of this one for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure where this is coming from.
I think what I would want would be something in the past that we just haven't seen yet, and we'll get to see Wanda experiencing this. That's I think what I would want.
Yeah, I would agree with that. This does to me seem like, I mean, we haven't seen Wanda like actually physically break down and deal with the grief, which we'll talk about again in a second here. And yeah, that seems like something that would be interesting to go back and revisit. And I said grief because Monica specifically mentions, like as she's describing what it was like in there, she says it was grief, talking about everything that Wanda was, putting forward because she was feeling that Wanda was inside her mind. So yeah, so we talked about that last week. We talked about how Wanda hasn't really dealt with everything that she's gone through, and
Mhm.
in what to us has been a few years, but for her was just a couple weeks. And yeah, so she's clearly dealing with that grief that we talked about. So I mentioned too that Monica is undergoing some tests, and Wu and Darcy come in and try to take her out for a briefing. And the doctor points out that they have to redo the test because the images are, well, as Darcy says, they're blank.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I don't think they're blank. They look like they're sort of blown out from light, or like living light, like Monica becomes in the comics. Her superhero name is Captain Marvel at first, but I don't think we see her take on that title for multiple reasons. But Photon, Spectrum, Pulsar, pick one of them. That's a whole bunch of Monica's monikers that she could go with in the movies here.
Yeah, that was the first thought that crossed my mind. I was like, okay, this has something to do with her powers or potential powers, whatever it is we haven't experienced or seen yet. That was my instinct, was that that's what it's for.
Yeah, I think they're definitely setting that up. Whether or not we see her fully powered in this series, or if it's setting up, maybe Captain Marvel 2 or something like that, we'll have to wait and see. They do get to that briefing where we see that Hayward is, and Director Hayward, of the director of S.w.o.r.d, that we met last week, is very eager to paint Wanda as the villain here. And I actually, because of comparing my notes and your notes and piecing things together, kind of came up with a theory here, because we've been talking about how Hayward, we don't trust him, right? There's something off about this guy.
Right.
And you asked why does S.w.o.r.d even have Vision to begin with? Because we do see, he shows everybody that Wanda broke into a S.w.o.r.d facility and stole Vision's corpse, and then went and started Westview and all of this the craziness here. So you asking why does S.w.o.r.D have Vision, and were they planning to use him as a weapon? My thought is yes, and that would be why Hayward is so anxious and so willing to do whatever it takes to end this whole situation, so he can recover Vision's body, because they are planning to use Vision as a weapon, and they can't lose that. S.w.o.r.D, as we saw last week, S.w.o.r.D seems to be moving in that direction, creating weapons and or deterrence, I guess they would refer to it as. And Monica showed a little bit of objection to that, pointing out that the O stands for observation, and so as opposed to creating weapons, which has that similarity to Fury in the Winter Soldier with Cap and their debate. So yeah, that's my thought now. I think Hayward is maybe anxious to get Vision back so he can get back to creating some sort of synthezoid weapon. I don't know. That was just sort of on the fly there. What do you think?
I think that's great. I think that's really, really great. Yeah, I'm also, if that is what's going on, did the Avengers know? Did Tony let them take Vision's body? Like, that just, I was thinking about that too. Like, he was, yeah, the Avengers were alive at the end of Infinity War. So I assume they would have taken his body with them or whatever. Yeah. Anyway.
Right. I mean, especially after, so my thought is I wouldn't necessarily go with Tony, because Tony was still lost and had to come back, and my guess is he would have had a lot of other stuff on his mind at that point.
Yes.
But Cap, though, on the other hand, who I guess, I don't know, was he a criminal still at this point? I'm not really sure. But you would think at this point he's not going to trust a government agency to just take Vision's body and do whatever they were going to do with it. So here's another interesting point. Kyle points out, how did S.w.o.r.D enter Wakanda? It was in Wakanda where Vision was killed by Thanos, and that's where his body would have been left. Granted, I would assume there would have been just an absolute mess after the king of Wakanda died in the blip there. So, I mean, yeah, all kinds of craziness that, just a whole bunch of questions. Let's just say that, because we have a whole lot of questions after this episode. And I mean, we're not even into the remotely big ones yet. So we also have one other interesting point from that briefing. Hayward asks Wu if Wanda has any other alias that she's gone by. And I don't know about you, but for me, that was the first time I noticed that the name Scarlet Witch hasn't been used yet in the MCU.
Yeah, the same. I was like, I had to go Google it. I was like, wait, has she not been called Scarlet Witch at all?
And we get that a lot in comic book movies in general, right? Like, they try to avoid going with the outright name. I know for the biggest example of that for me was the Daredevil series on Netflix. I don't remember them calling him Daredevil until maybe like the end of season 2. So that stood out to me. Again, we just go with Scarlet Witch as the name, but they have never used it yet. So we talked a little bit already about Wanda stealing Vision's corpse from S.w.o.r.d. And here's a look at what they showed. Interestingly, I don't remember if I talked about this here last week or if this was on Zacks of Life, but Paul Bettany in an interview talked about how this was meant to be, and this was before we saw this, this was meant to be a post-credit scene in Avengers Endgame that eventually got scrapped. So I thought that was interesting that this Endgame would have ended with Wanda breaking into S.w.o.r.d. And because we talked too about how the last we saw of Wanda before this series, she was very peaceful and like dealing with Clint Barton as they were, going through the whole, I wish they could know we won. And, Wanda points out that Vision and Black Widow both do. And so to go from that to this, right. I mean, seems like something happened pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead if you had anything.
No, I was just saying if she found out that somebody had his body after she's been gone this whole time, like I could reasonably imagine that she'd be upset by this and like, no, you're not going to have him. I'm going to go get him. As Monica says in the briefing, she goes, I don't think this was an act of aggression. And I mean, there's more to that, not just this. And then that's when he shows this. But my thought is that, yeah, I don't think it's an act of aggression. I think she's just like, no, you do not get to do this.
Yeah. And I mean, it's totally fair. I would like to see the moment where she learns that S.w.o.r.d has Vision, whether that's she learns it from a villain that's yet to pop up in this series or a friend or something. But I would like to see sometime in this series a flashback of her finding out what happens and seeing that grief. And maybe that quick glimpse from what Monica was seeing is from that. Who knows? We do meet another character from the comics in this issue, a special 4-legged character, and that is Sparky the dog. Although in the comics, he is very different. So this is Sparky in the comics, and he appears in a series called, I think it's just called Vision or Visions. Vision has a synthezoid family. So he has a wife and 2 kids, and then decides to make them a synthezoid dog as well that they name Sparky. So the dog we meet in this episode is a nice nod to that. I thought it was interesting too. The only quote unquote lines that the dog has before Vision turns him into a synthezoid. I'm not going to get into the nature of that because it's pretty dark, but you just see word bubbles that just say sniff. And in the episode, either Billy or Tommy suggest that they name the dog Sniffy. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. But then, of course, he somehow short circuits an outlet, and that gives them the name Sparky.
At Agnes's suggestion.
Yeah, which Vision comes in shortly before that, and he is in his human form, and Wanda asks why, and he just said, I have a hunch somebody might pop over, and sure enough, Agnes does, with a doghouse for Sparky, even though they had just found out about Sparky, seconds earlier. So again, some more weirdness from Agnes.
And she said she saw it through her kitchen window or whatever. Like,
right.
How close are your homes that you can see? Like,
and I have to go back.
Odd.
I have to go back and look too, because eventually the doghouse has the name Sparky on it. I don't know if it said that when she came in with it. So clearly, again, Agnes is weird. There's something going on with Agnes. And speaking of, Wanda decides, once they land on the name Sparky, Wanda decides to go ahead and use her powers to make a collar for Sparky right in front of Agnes, with Agnes right there. And Vision objects to that for obvious reasons. They've been doing their best this entire series to hide their powers. So that sparks a little debate before things get turned into a different direction. When the boys ask again if they can keep Sparky, and Wanda and Vision tell them they have to be at least 10 years old to be able to deal with a responsibility like that. So the boys simply go ahead and age themselves up again. And again, right in front of Agnes, who is the second time she's seeing this happen and completely unfazed by it. So, yep, not sure where we're going. There's even more weirdness with Agnes later on that we'll get to in a little bit. But I mean, at this point, we know, right? We know that she's different from the other neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we come back out to the real world outside of the Hex, and this is where we get a very busy scene. It's maybe only it's probably about a minute long, but a lot happens in this scene. And one of those things is Monica is going through what she needs to build some sort of vehicle to break through into the sitcom world. And she specifically mentions photons in her formula there. So thought that was interesting. This is a look at what she looks like in the comics. This is while she is using the title Captain Marvel. The look is basically the same all throughout. So she goes by Captain Marvel, Photon, Spectrum, a whole bunch of different names. So I would guess that the fact that she specifically says photons is a nod to the fact that maybe we'll see her use that title, but who knows? Again, we could see a lot of different directions they go for that. There's like I said, a lot of other things that happen in this scene. First of all, Darcy finally gets her coffee, which was very important.
And Jimmy looked so happy. He's carrying 3 cups of coffee and he's just like having a blast.
Yeah. So yeah, that was satisfying. That was our Brendan Fraser at the end of Revenge of the Mummy moment there. She gets her cup of coffee. But the big thing, and one that a lot of Marvel fans have been talking about since this episode came out, is that Monica mentions an aerospace engineer who could help with this project. And we see her take out her phone and send a message. No mention of who this aerospace engineer is. What's your thought? First thing that comes to mind for you?
I mean, my first instinct was Rhodey, but then I couldn't remember if he was just like more of a pilot and not an engineer. And then Reed Richards was what I was initially thinking. What about you?
Yeah, Rhodey was my first thought too. And you're right, he is really a pilot, but I think he's held a lot of titles throughout, so he could be considered an aerospace engineer. In the comics, he has a relationship with Carol Danvers, so maybe there's a connection through them. I don't know. That was my first thought, but yeah, the popular belief right now, I think, is Reed Richards, and this would be the second consecutive episode that we get what could be a subtle nod to the Fantastic Four. After last week, we found out that S.w.o.r.d's astronauts, half of S.w.o.r.d's astronauts disappeared in the blip. Could be a tie to Fantastic Four there. And then Reed Richards is an aerospace engineer amongst 100 other titles that he holds and degrees and all of that. So absolutely could be. To me, that seems like an odd direction to go because I think we're still so far off from the Fantastic Four and joining the MCU, but who knows? That could be the direction that they're going.
I will say, on the podcast I listened to, someone had written in saying that the foreign subtitles, and I don't know what language, used a feminine form of aerospace engineer instead of masculine. So it's possible it could be a female engineer that we haven't maybe yet seen in the MCU. But yeah, so thought that was interesting.
That's definitely interesting because if that is that, I mean, that could be anything. That could, maybe there was just an error in the translation or something. Sure. But that could mean that another popular theory is Riri Williams, who is going to be the one of the subjects in Armor Wars, the Armor Wars series coming up to Disney Plus within the next couple of years or so. So that is an interesting thought as well. Although she is much younger, and my thought is she wouldn't have. Monica wouldn't have any relationship with Riri Williams at this point. It's possible that changes. I'm not sure. Maybe they go a different direction, but Yeah, I mean, it's another name on the list. I mean, the possibilities are almost endless. So we'll have to wait for that one to pay off. I'm guessing it's
Yeah,
probably going to be a little
probably.
while. We alluded to the name the Hex earlier a few times, and that's because Darcy did us a huge favor in giving us that shorthand for what to call the whole sitcom
Yes.
realm. It's a lot shorter than the Maximoff anomaly.
Mhm.
The Hex is a lot easier to say. So she refers to it that way because of the hexagonal shape of the anomaly, and all of the hexagons that were showing up that we talked about, last week, and I think even a couple weeks before that too. So, yeah. So the hex is what we're calling this realm from now on, and that's pretty convenient in my book, at least.
Yeah.
Another
Yes.
another thing that happens in this scene is Jimmy Woo mentions Captain Marvel, and the look on Monica's face is probably not what you would expect. She seems, unhappy. She wants to kind of brush off that mention and just move on to the next topic. Interesting, because last we know, her relationship with Carol Danvers was a good one. She was a child the last time that we saw them together. I'm curious to know what happened since then. A lot of different ways they could go with that as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
And Kyle points out, yeah, there you go. They then go on to find out, and Monica decides to go ahead and shoot at her pants that she wore in the Hex. Just goes ahead and steals Wu's gun and shoots at her outfit, and discovers that it's bulletproof, and that leads them to realize that Wanda's not just making people see things like she normally would, like she did in Age of Ultron and Civil War and things like that. She's now actually altering physical reality and changing things. So they point out that is well beyond what we've seen from her power before, and now they know that they're dealing with something very different. And then back inside the Hex, we get back to Vision's place of work for the first time since was that the first episode or the second? Yeah, first episode, because they were dealing with Mr. Hart. And he is teaching Norm, who we met in the first few episodes, how to use the internet, which I thought was a fun, 80s nod there, like going back to technology. But use the internet, and they get an email, and the whole office starts reading this email. What are your thoughts on that? Why did they all simultaneously? First of all, everybody gets this email all at once, and then all of us start reading the email out loud.
Yeah, I kind of think maybe one person is controlling multiple people, and so as they're reading, then it just like that's what every other character is doing as well. But I don't know.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is they've talked about how 1,000 people are being held hostage, but yet their board that we saw in last week's episode still only has the few IDs that we saw from last week. I'm wondering if maybe all of these people in here aren't real people still. There could be a lot of other. Maybe this is something created, like actual physical people created by either Wanda or some other entity of some sort. I'm not sure, but that would be an explanation for why everybody is acting all in unison like that, if they're all, more or less a hive mind.
Right.
So they go through the email, and Vision realizes again something is very wrong, and he wants to get some answers. So he uses his powers in a way that we've never really seen him use them before, I guess. He just sort of just turns off the computer and then decides to more or less turn off the computer in Norm's head, I guess, and brings him out of that mind control for a moment. And Norm immediately starts to freak out. And something is obviously wrong. He's, says he needs to call his sister. He needs to get back to his family. He has no idea how long it's been. And he keeps pointing out that that she is doing this, or he's under her control. He never specifically says Wanda, though, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think I read that in your recap and I was like, "Oh my goodness, it's so true." Yeah. He doesn't say who, just her. Um,
I mean, that could just be that he doesn't know who Wanda is. It could still be Wanda that's doing all of this, and he doesn't know what to call her. Although she's an Avenger, she's been on TV.
mhm.
Everybody has seen all the craziness that's gone on. So you would think he would be aware of who Wanda is, but I don't know. Maybe there is somebody else pulling the strings. Not sure. So that takes us back inside the hex, or back to Wanda's home, and the twins want to show Vision how they've trained Sparky,
Mhm.
and immediately go looking for him. But Wanda says he's at work, and they say, but it's Saturday. And that's interesting to me, because these twins, at least as far as we can tell, aren't real people, right? They shouldn't be questioning this reality. They're created by Wanda in one way or another. So there obviously something's up there, that they are now questioning the reality as well.
Yeah,
And
and I think and Wanda, said something about how Vision needed a distraction, which I thought was a strange thing to say in the presence of your children as well.
right, yeah, and they question that whether or not he needs a distraction from them, and that sparks this, that touching sitcom family moment where they sit down to have this family talk, and she points out that they will always be brothers and family is forever. And Tommy asks Wanda if she had a brother or has a brother, and she says he's far away, and that makes me sad sometimes. And I thought that was interesting, given what we know from
Right.
the end of this episode. So
And what she told, um, Geraldine/Monica, um, she said her brother had died, right? Like
yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, she says I'm a twin. I had a brother. So yeah, and
maybe not died, but yeah, had a brother, yeah.
well, yeah, because then Geraldine points out that he was killed by Ultron, and that's what sets off Wanda there. But yeah, so she definitely acknowledged that Pietro had died, but points out here that he's far away, and that makes her sad. And we know that all of this is happening because Wanda was sad, right? As we talked about, she's
Right.
dealing with this grief and everything. So maybe that was the moment that sparked something that happens in a little bit that we'll get to. But this moment is interrupted when a drone gets sent in by S.w.o.r.d, because Monica has the realization that if everything changes as it goes into the hex, what if they sent in something that fits with that time period? So they send in an 80s drone, which still looked a little advanced for the 80s to me.
Right.
But, given the computers that they were dealing with in Vision's office, the drone seems pretty advanced. But Monica is trying to use the drone to communicate, as she's like literally speaking into a microphone, trying to talk to Wanda. Hayward has other ideas, and he immediately orders an agent to take the shot. Monica questions. She says, "Wait, the drone isn't armed," but clearly it is. As they shoot a missile at Wanda. I mean, we know better. Wanda's not going to get hurt by something like that.
Right.
And that's when we get this big, like, sort of powerful scene here, where Wanda finally steps outside of Westview, comes back into the real world, and confronts S.w.o.r.d. But as you mentioned, she is more or less specifically confronting Hayward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like she has an exchange with Monica for sure, but her threats, if you will, and what she's saying is like all directed at him. Like she knows what he's up to. At least that's what I read it.
Yeah, no, it totally seems that way, and is sort of punctuated by the fact that she turns the guns directly on Hayward. So as you can see here, Monica is right there, front and center. She's the closest one, but Wanda doesn't seem to perceive her as a threat in any way, and seems to almost have some sort of level of trust with Monica, and instead, like I said, turns the guns on Hayward. So clearly there's some sort of animosity between those two, whether or not they've met in any way before. I mean, I guess Wanda would recognize him as the director of S.w.o.r.d. And going back to my theory that, you know, he wants to use Vision as a weapon. She knows that S.w.o.r.D. took Vision's body. That could be what's creating this sort of rivalry here that we have going. You also pointed out an interesting, you know, something interesting here about this episode and previous ones as well. Time seems to be working differently inside and outside of the Hex.
Yeah, like, well, Darcy in the last episode, it seems like she'd been watching multiple episodes in the different decades, and not just one in each. And then it's when Jimmy calls to Wanda through the radio, it's nighttime where they are outside of the Hex, but it's the middle of the day. She's at the meeting with Dottie. And then same thing here. She was just with her boys and it's middle of the day and she steps outside, it's nighttime. So is it like are they off by just a couple of hours? Is it different days? Like, what's happening? How fast is time moving inside, or slow is time moving inside the Hex?
Yeah, I mean, is Wanda specifically just altering that as well to fit the broadcast and what they need for that? I don't know. That is an interesting point to make, though, because I mean, maybe time has something to do with this as well. We've dealt with time travel already in the MCU. Who knows if that's, you know, playing a role here. So as we mentioned, Wanda turns the guns on Hayward. She does in this scene also have her accent back. It doesn't appear to be with her in the Hex, but in the real world, she does still have her accent. And then as she goes back into the Hex, the barrier, which has previously to this point shown up as blue anytime something passes through, as Wanda goes through, everything sort of turns red. So that was another interesting thing as well. More or less, I think, confirming that this is Wanda's barrier that she has set here. After that scene, we get we get a return to those weird commercials. So after we didn't get one last week, and this one is very, very on the nose, very easy to grasp here. Lagos paper towels. They even use the tagline for when you make a mess you didn't mean to, which I would argue that you probably never really mean to make a mess, but you know. Right. But obviously referencing the events of Captain America's Civil War, and when she, you know, failed to save people from that explosion from Crossbones, from Rumlow's bomb that he set off there. So,
which then led to the signing of the Sokovia Accords and basically made, you know, Cap and everybody else who didn't sign them criminals. Yeah,
very good point. And you also actually had a theory that kind of went a little step farther on that too, didn't you? About sharing, yeah.
Yeah, when in the movie, when they're back at the house after the incident, she says it's my fault, and Steve's like, you know, no, it's not. That's not true. And she says, no, turn the TV back on. They're being very specific. And then the two of them talk a little bit, and he's like, hey, it's, you know, like they both accept blame for what happened. Right. Like, you know, neither one of them is completely innocent, and in that instance. So, but yeah,
that could be, you know, pointing to the fact that maybe Wanda is not fully to blame here. Like there could be somebody else sharing the blame here. So that's an interesting look at this too. I like what that entails, potentially, at least going forward.
Right. Who knows?
We see another character who we haven't seen since I think the second episode. And that's the mailman. I don't think we have a name. Agnes might have mentioned him by name in the second episode. I'd have to go back and check that out. But he seems to be a little bit off, doesn't he?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
There's something a little bit weird about him. And especially in this one, he specifically says to the boys, after they tell him that their dog is missing, he tells them, don't worry, your mom won't let him go too far. And then specifically looks at Wanda and sort of gives her a nod. And it's almost as if, you know, he knows that Wanda is in control. So thought that was pretty interesting too. But that's when we unfortunately get this situation here where they do find Sparky. We think Agnes is holding what appears to be the wrapped up body of Sparky after she says he ate, I guess, her azalea bushes is what killed him. And obviously that's a big emotional scene for the boys. They found this dog and had, as Vision points out, it's rare that you find a dog and have to bury him in the same day. So yeah, this was, I don't know that I trust that we've seen the last of Sparky for multiple reasons. I don't trust Agnes for, as we've talked about. And two, Sparky does eventually become a synthezoid dog in the comics. So maybe we still see a slightly different version of Sparky. And the boys also obviously are very upset. And I believe it is Tommy that tells her she can fix the dead, tells Wanda she can fix the dead. And that takes, she is taken aback a little bit by that. And the weirder thing about that is, again, another weird moment for Agnes here is she questions Wanda. She says, "You can do that." Which obviously, if you're dealing with a conversation with your neighbor and their kids, and you find out that your neighbor can resurrect people or dogs, you're probably going to have a bigger reaction than that. So obviously, this is not a normal neighbor reaction for Agnes, which we knew. We knew she, she wasn't a normal neighbor given what we've seen in this episode. But if you thought, like I did, that she was somebody who was helping Wanda and trying to manipulate her powers in one way or another, you would think she would be aware of Wanda's abilities. So that kind of threw me for a loop too, because now I'm not sure what Agnes's role is in all of this. I'm not sure what she is aware of. Did you have any other thoughts? Did that change the way you look at Agnes?
I just wondered if she's kind of just playing along for the sake of like the boys being there, like, "Oh, you can do that," almost acting like she doesn't realize or know what's going on. But yeah, that's about where I am.
Wanda does also say to the boys, "We can't reverse death, no matter how sad it makes us." And that's interesting. I thought that kind of works on two levels here. Obviously, referencing Vision, she was obviously very sad. She resurrected and reversed the death of Vision. But she also specifically mentioned earlier that, as we pointed out, that Pietro being far away makes her sad sometimes. And did she inadvertently use her powers to reverse death in that case, in a roundabout sort of way, as we'll get to in just a minute here? But so I thought that was an interesting line as well. Then Vision and Wanda, as Vision returns home and tells Wanda about the whole situation with Norm and the whole everything he's been realizing sort of comes to a head in this moment, and he starts to really confront Wanda about what's going on, and she just plays it off and basically goes into the other room to watch TV, and the credits start to roll as if the sitcom is over. And in that moment, I was honestly, I was very frustrated. I was like, they are not about to end this episode like that. Luckily, Vision continues to confront Wanda, and the credits just sort of cut, and the episode keeps rolling. And Vision, finally lets it all boil over. He is not happy with what's happening. He still doesn't know what's happening, but he points out that she can't control him like she controls everybody else. And she actually just looks back at him and says, "Can't I?" And I thought that was really interesting too. She also goes on to say, "All of this is for us," which she sort of, I have conflicting thoughts on this whole scene here. Because as you pointed out, what were your thoughts on her argument about, that it's not all her?
I believe her. And I don't know if that's because I want to believe her, but I believe that she's not controlling everything. Like, she's definitely in charge of a lot of things or responsible for a lot of things. But she seemed frustrated, at least in a way that to me made sense. Like, I'm not doing all of this.
Yeah, and I totally agree. She does seem very convincing. But again, seconds before that, she said, "All of this is for us," as if, look what I've made for us here, and like everything is perfect. So it's definitely, she's at least playing a role in it, right? She does say, "I don't know how any of this started in the first place," and we don't know how they got there. So it does seem as though somebody else set this up to begin with, but Wanda is obviously happy with it, and she is doing her part in adding to it. So, really want to know. We just continue to pile up these questions, and really looking forward to getting some answers here. We do have 4 episodes left, so we will be getting some answers pretty soon, hopefully. But speaking of questions, this episode ends with the biggest twist finale we could have expected. It's hard to even really break down what exactly happens here. So there's a ring at the doorbell, and that interrupts their fight. There's a ring of the doorbell, I should say, that interrupts their fight. And we cut between the Hex and the real world, where we see Darcy walking over to the TV and seeing what's happening as Wanda goes and opens the door. And they both see at the same time that the person ringing the doorbell is Pietro. But it's not our Pietro.
Right, right.
It's the X universe Pietro. It's Evan Peters playing him, as opposed to Aaron Taylor Johnson, who played the character in Age of Ultron. So instead, we get this X-Men Pietro, who is a very different version of the character. I mean, what were your thoughts when you saw this happen?
I mean, I was disappointed it wasn't Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mean like overall, like what I had questioned?
Yeah, go for it. Because I mean, we could definitely spend too much time on this for sure.
So she seemed really surprised by this Peter or Pietro, whatever name we're gonna go with. Almost like she didn't know or expect that he was coming, and almost like she doesn't fully know him. But then if he's from a multiverse, why does he know her? Because these two characters, as far as we know, like they're from 2 completely different universes. So, and from what we know of his character, he doesn't have a twin sister.
Right.
He has a younger sister, but he recognizes her. Like he knows who she is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think he is that same character. I think we're getting that X-Men character. I think as far as him recognizing Wanda and knowing who she is in the first place, would probably chalk that up to whatever is going on in his mind via the Hex, whatever power is, mind controlling him, because there's something off about him, right? Like he doesn't seem exactly the same as we remember him in the X-Men movies. His voice is different.
Mm-hmm.
His attire fits with the 80s, I suppose, but still something a little bit different about him. Although I guess he was in the 80s in those X-Men movies too, last we saw. So, so yeah, there's definitely something off. There's something different about him, but I do still think it is going to be that multiverse character, and this is the bridge to the multiverse, because Kevin Feige and the people at Marvel know how to make Marvel fans happy. Mm-hmm. And I think teasing with this moment and then kind of pulling it back and just saying, oh no, this is just some other guy. I think that would be a little disappointing to fans, and I don't think that's the direction they'll go. I don't think this means we're going to get all of those X-Men characters in the MCU. I don't think we get James McAvoy playing Xavier. I don't think we get Fassbender playing Magneto. I definitely don't think we get Hugh Jackman playing Wolverine, because he said multiple times that he's done. So what I think they will end up doing is acknowledge that the multiverse exists and those other characters are still over there. And we might even get a cameo or something where we get, like in Deadpool, when they get the shot where all the X-Men are in the room for just a second and then they close the door. We might get something like that. But given that Quicksilver in this universe is gone, there's a void there. So there's a space for this Quicksilver in the MCU, whereas presumably characters like Wolverine and Charles Xavier and Magneto already exist in this universe. So there wouldn't be a need to pull them over from another universe. So that's my explanation, my reasoning for why this Pietro might stay and we might have him in the MCU going forward. That's just a theory. That's kind of what I'm rooting for too, because I do love this version of the character. I think he was fantastic. So I would love to see more of him. But even if it is just, we get him as Pietro for the next 4 episodes, it's still going to be fun. It was still a huge, crazy moment. I know a lot of people, I've seen some videos that not quite to the level of Avengers Endgame portal scene, but some big reactions from people watching at home, which was really fun to see. So yeah, just another really, really cool moment from the MCU. Yeah, so I think we touched on every. Oh, one other point about this scene too is, and you actually mentioned this first, that Vision doesn't change when Wanda goes to open the door for Pietro.
Yeah, and earlier in the episode, the very beginning when Agnes shows up, he's hiding behind the pillow as he switches to his human form, and then of course he comes downstairs in the next morning completely in his human form. So yeah, this was almost like he was gonna get answers or was hoping to get some answers by just being himself. Like he was ready to confront whatever's behind the
Right.
door.
Yeah, and as we were talking about, I mean, he seems to be fed up with this whole world and wants to know what's going on outside of Westview. And I do want to say too that he questions why there are no other children in Westview, as we talked about in previous episodes too, like the whole for the children thing, and yet there never were any children. However, we have seen in trailers that there's a Halloween themed episode coming up at some point, and there are children in the background of those trailers. So maybe Wanda corrects that issue moving forward. Maybe because Vision pointed it out, and now she knows I have to fix that. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, so we both agreed that this was one of our favorite episodes, if not our absolute favorite, and that it's hard to deny that ending, that crazy twist ending there.
I know. That was a lot of fun. It's like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" And I'm really glad they showed him and not just like the back of the head.
Yeah.
Because
And made us wait for it another week.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they definitely needed to give us this reveal at the end of an episode, because it would not have felt the same if we got it at the beginning. Although now we're just counting down the days until we get the next episode, and I think that's exactly what they want anyway. So yeah, it definitely worked out. I'm excited to see where they go with this. Who knows? It's crazy because the MCU is already this huge thing, and now you're bridging the gap to these other universes that have, the X-Men universe consists of 11 or 12 movies or something like that. There's the rumors of Spider-Man 3 connecting to other Spider-Man universes. We're getting something completely. The MCU is already unprecedented, and we're getting even more unprecedented. So if that's possible, if something could be more unprecedented, I'm not sure, but yeah. So something very special seems to be happening, and I am so excited to watch it all unfold.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Any other thoughts before we wrap up for today?
I think I'm good. We'll be here all day if I keep talking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We could definitely waste everyone's time. But we do have some other shows coming up today that so we're gonna have to get off here to make way for some other people here. But we do have Parks Talk Live coming up at 4 p.m. Pacific time, followed by Jeremiah taking a look at building DCA 1.0 at 5:30 Pacific time. Then tonight at 7:30 Pacific, we have Laughing Place Movie Club, where Kyle and I will actually be talking about the new 30 for 30, Al Davis versus the NFL. So you can come back and join us for that. Then if you want more Marvel news, check back in on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific, where Benji and I will be on for Marvel Time, talking about this week's comics as well as some other Marvel news. We'll also, of course, be talking a little bit about WandaVision, because how can we not? And then we also have the next episode of Zacks of Life podcast out today, so you can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. So aside from that, we will see you next week talking about another episode of WandaVision. Bye everyone.